I came here because I realized I could never love Remus like I love you. Cecilia's eyes shimmered in the dull rain-drenched afternoon light, making his heart contract as she reached for his hand and he took her in his arms and kissed her, in a long and drawn-out way. In a way that would let her know he really meant it. But Cecilia had broken off quickly and looked urgently as Sirius. There's something I need to tell you. I'm not a mole. From her coat she pulled out a wand and held it out for his scrutinization. And before you say it, I know you're his friend, and he's in Azkaban. But I don't want to think about him. Come here. If I hadn't done it, they would have, said Snape, irritably. In Sirius's mind the scene faded, having been entirely imaginary as Severus Snape's contrasting tone cut through the daydream as a hot knife through butter. I was doing him a favor, Miss Tonks, he added, folding his arms. Doing him a favor? Are you kidding me? Tonks was on her feet and stalking around the kitchen of number 12. He barely remembers his own name, let alone mine, she huffed, folding her arms, and gave Snape a sulky look. He keeps calling me Amy. And he forgot we had Freya. Forgot to get her from school. The child was frightened. That was it. Sirius's attempt at recapturing his thoughts about Cecilia were all but done in, and he realized Tonks was staring at him. Sirius turned away and pretended to stifle a yawn. The meeting was going on far too long and had disintegrated into a slanging match. He wanted to tell them that Cecilia was upstairs, tell them that she was not gone, and restore a measure of the happy hope that most of them felt before she arrived at Grimmauld Place the first time. But then there was his selfish side, the side that usually won, in the end. He could just sit there and he could keep her. Keep the secret that she was in his house, pretend that she had come to him. She would be perfect and she would be his. In his mind's eye she was getting tired and she had crept off to find somewhere to sleep. Cecilia had found his room, not decimated as it now remained since Mooney's episode, but tidy and neat as he liked to keep it. She sat on the bed and kicked off her shoes before trying her golden head next to his blanketed pillow. He'd find her, and she'd cry, he'd comfort her and she would return the comfort as his distresses over his friend and about Azkaban. Both two people who have lost their families comforting one another. I promise it won't happen again. The words began to dissolve as the boundaries of reality and fantasy began to blur with reality winning by means of Snape's and Tonks's voices penetrating Sirius's consciousness. He turned to the two quarreling Order members as the amplitude of their argument was reaching breaking point. He's my husband, Severus, declared Tonks, having already admitted the truth to the Order before then. Snape on the other hand was choosing to ignore her and had folded his arms and looked away from Tonks as if her point of view was irrelevant. Hey! She replied sharply. Are you listening to me? Look, I think we're all getting upset, said Minerva, trying to smooth things over as Snape glared dangerously at Tonks. We have to trust Dumbledore's parting words. He has a plan. Well, I don't know about you, but I'd like to know what it is, said Bathsheba Bradle. We can't prepare without a plan. Sirius watched one or two of the Order nod in agreement. Are you sure the potion's ready, Severus? Asked Arthur Weasley. Now we don't have Mrs. Frobisher anymore? Is it going to be safe for Harry this time? Asked Tonks bitterly. I mean, don't just make it stronger like you did with the Confundus charm. And just what is that supposed to mean, Miss Tonks? Snape was on his feet, his eyes like gimlets. Ladies and gentlemen, said Minerva, a little shrilly as a measure of alarm entered her voice. Please, unless this has a direct impact on what we are about to do, then please refrain from this coarseness. Sturgis. She turned to the Ministry wizard at the front, who was holding a piece of parchment and quaking terribly. Indeed I do. Cowards. He added, gritting his teeth. Indeed yes, he confirmed as Minerva gave him a classroom stare and Sturgis coughed solemnly. Cecilia Frobisher was called out by a Hogwarts student, Having located her at the home of Mr. and Mrs. Dursley, Harry Potter's guardians, 2 Dementors were set upon her, for she was deemed to be a risk to both moles and wizards. The squib. No offense, Arabella. Arabella nodded from her chair near Minerva. Arabella Figg attempted to assist in her flight, but she was too late, and Sturgis sniffed and pulled a handkerchief from his breast pocket. One of them terrible beasts performed the kiss, which was witnessed by the witch in charge of the operation and a dozen back-upperers. Around Sturgis people were looking solemn and somber, as he recounted the tale. Snape's stare was fixed at the fireplace. Bathsheba's arms were folded tightly across her robe. Mr. Weasley was holding Mrs. Weasley's hand. Each of the Order had heard the news, of course, but now it was official. "I just can't believe our own son searched their house." Mrs. Weasley's face was pale, and she was speaking to her husband loudly as if not caring who heard. "Percy ordered it," Arthur Weasley explained to the Order. "He's in the Department of Communication. By all accounts he was there when it was confirmed and took it upon himself to act." "Don't say his name," whispered Mrs. Weasley to her husband, and Tonks, who was standing next to her, hugged her shoulders. The room was quiet for a good few minutes, and Sirius wondered what would happen if he were to bring Cecilia down from his father's study. Eventually Snape stood up and spoke. That is to say, I have information which means the potion will be ready for Mr. Potter. It is unlikely that it would have been solved if she hadn't gone to the Dursleys' house. We wouldn't have got what was needed." There was silence, vacuity. All in the room had listened to Snape, but no one acknowledged him or commented to the effect. At the reaction to his explanation, Snape sat down in silence. And then a round of applause began, starting from Bill Weasley and radiating out to the other wizards and witches. "Mrs. Frobisher." He was cheering. "For Mrs. Frobisher." Sirius looked up. He hoped that the noise would not permeate upstairs and that Cecilia would not hear and make an appearance downstairs. A reappearance from the grave would likely bring about a halt to everything, and that couldn't happen. Just then, a crack in the living room brought the applause to an abrupt end, with those in the kitchen as one wizard looking at the door. "Shacklebolt," intoned Snape as Kingsley Shacklebolt stepped through. "I thought you were supposed to be at Hogwarts." The wizard nodded his head slowly at Snape in acknowledgement and looked around the Order members who were still there. "Kingsley?" prompted Arthur Weasley. "What is it?" The highest-ranking Auror closed the kitchen door slowly and gazed around at the wizards again, this time with an air of solemnity. "I've just come from Azkaban. I was indeed at Hogwarts this afternoon, Severus," he conceded, "but I was sent back to the Ministry. It has been deemed that any of the last consignment of prisoners guilty of attacking a witch or wizard representing the Ministry under cross-examination is to be eliminated." "The last consignment?" echoed Tonks. "Do you mean the so-called half-breeds?" "Indeed so. I am so sorry, Tonks," Kingsley added as murmuring began around them. "You're sorry? Why?" Tonks' voice became more high-pitched and an air of panic entered it. "You mean the werewolves?" interrupted Snape loudly. "Indeed," replied Kingsley, looking at Tonks before glancing over to Sirius. "They are to use liquefied flicksweed. This is the likely fate of one of us for attacking Lucius Malfoy." "Merlin's beard!" exclaimed Sturgis Podmore. "That is indeed horrifying." "More horrifying than Malfoy being made into an Auror? One of us?" asked Molly, looking around at the Order members. To her left Tonks had gone white and had sank down onto the chair next to Snape, who, in turn, had turned sallower. "Remus attacked Malfoy," explained Kingsley, and those who had not caught on earlier were joined by the rest, expressing various states of shock and revulsion. "He is one of those to be executed, and I am given to understand that the flicksweed toxin is quick." Shacklebolt shot a look at Snape, who jarred his head in affirmation. "Can Dumbledore stand for him?" asked Tonks, getting to her feet and beginning to pace around. "When he is taken for trial?" "There is unlikely to be a trial," replied Kingsley. He knew the werewolf code, even before they tightened it. In any case, the only thing the ministry cares about is the elimination of half-breeds. Their corruption is likely to spread to spurious claims in any case, and any breach of the werewolf code would be used against him. A crunch in Sirius's stomach caused the wizard to get to his feet. He looked down before looking at his cousin straight ahead of him and then sat down. Silent words began to scream out in his mind, blocked in his throat from becoming said. Everything was worked out, Cecilia Frobisher, he thought fiercely. You were going to be with my best friend, you were going to stay together and live a wonderful life. You were going to be with him, and my knowing this would mean you were out of mind. I would eventually have forgotten you. And now? We shouldn't try to stop things, Sirius said, looking around him. Dumbledore has engaged us all in the plan. Kingsley, is there any way you can stop what is happening, delay it or something? I'll try, replied Kingsley doubtfully. I'm not sure there is much I can do though. Dumbledore's not at the ministry. He's not? Gasped Molly, and Arthur took her hand. I was convinced that's where he would be. Has anyone heard from him? Not us, said Kingsley and Sturgis in unison. We assumed you all knew that he has made no contact with the ministry, continued Kingsley. We've got everything worked out, haven't we? Everything? Are you sure? Asked Arthur Weasley. We have Dumbledore's instructions, but can we work out what he's got planned? Did he plan it? Sirius leaned back in his chair and folded his arms. The plan had to go ahead, for everyone's sake. A vision appeared in his mind of a woman 2 floors up, no doubt sitting on the floor with the books and information she needed spread out around her, just as she had done in those countless moments in the glimpses he had stolen. The only thing I could not work out was why my heart could not get over you. And now look at the state everything's in. He realized people were staring at him and hoped he hadn't said aloud what he had been thinking. Sirius, do you have a contribution? He shook his head, and the discussion about whether Dumbledore's original plan should go ahead or whether they should wait for further instructions continued. And what have I done to help anything? Sirius questioned of himself silently as he looked round at the miserable faces. Nothing. Absolutely nothing. As the conversation around him trailed off with the decision that they were going to proceed as planned decided. He got to his feet and shook his head. You've remained strong, Sirius, said Molly kindly as the order dispersed. In the corner of the room Bathsheba was holding Tunks's hand. You've done things honorably and selflessly. He replied as fleeting guilty images crossing his cerebellum. What we all need is some rest, and everything will be as it should be, added Molly, following Arthur out. We must be brave and strong. Sirius smiled wanly at the retreating figure of Mrs. Weasley, and he thought about the big, mole-sized secret he had kept from the Order. It all had to go to plan. He had to be brave and strong. He watched as Bathsheba led Tunks out of the kitchen and took her upstairs. His cousin was clearly shocked, but not as shocked, probably, as he had been when a damp and apparition-like figure had stood on his doorstep that evening. Why did you come back here, Mrs. Frobisher, to tempt me so cruelly? 88,888,888. A little-known thing about Floo powder is that, if the person to whom the message is intended is not by an available chimney or hearth at the exact time a message is sent, then the message remains in the Floo network until the person is, or in this case persons are, in close enough a proximity in order to retrieve it. The 2 young wizards intended for this message, sent almost 12 hours before in response to the recipient's kind actions, got the shock of their lives on 2 counts. One from the fact that the message sender they believed to be dead, and second, that the face of said message sender appeared ethereally in a fireplace in a room where they technically shouldn't be. Once Fred and George Weasley had got over the shock of seeing Cecilia Frobisher's face in the fireplace of the new headmistress of Hogwarts, their purpose for being there was all but forgotten.